Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. I'm excited today to talk about a topic which, if anybody has been listening to me for any period of time, knows is important to me, and that is the idea of having schools have their own identity. They are some sort of thematic school, whether it's classical, whether it's technical, whether it's medical, whatever it is, but there is something that makes that school unique that allows parents who are looking to choose schools to give them some sort of reason to go to that school. And so today we're going to talk more about that with somebody who has been involved in magnet schools for 40 years. And my guest today to talk about this with me is Jane Wagner. Jane is very recently retired. I say recently retired within weeks of retirement. Jane served 43 years in the Fresno Unified School District, beginning in 1991, where she taught at an environmental science magnet school. And she taught there for 7 years and moved to a school without a theme for a couple of years. But then in 1993, she landed at Buller Talent School, where she initially taught 7th and 8th grade English language arts and a variety of visual and performing arts classes. Just to be clear, Buller Talent is a visual and performing arts magnet school. In 1995, she began her 31-year run directing the annual Buller Talent Middle School musical, opening with The Music Man and closing this year with Honk Jr. In 1997, Jane and Jody Lipari assumed the roles of Buller Talent School Visual and Performing Arts co-coordinators while continuing to teach 8th grade core academics. In 1999, she joined Randy Berger in co-directing Showcase, a grades 6 through 8 award-winning show choir that performs choreographed and staged pop and contemporary music at local, state, and national events. In 2017, Jane left the academic classroom to focus on the management of the Buller Talent Visual and Performing Arts program, in addition to directing the annual middle school musical and showcase. Throughout her entire career, Jane has been passionate about the power of visual and performing arts. Whether teaching at a traditional or magnet school, she always sought ways to incorporate the visual and performing arts as a means to engage students, develop the whole child, foster a sense of self and identity, and provide a forum to bridge differences and cultivate understanding. She has thoroughly enjoyed her 43 years in education, but is greatly looking forward to spending time with her 6 sons, their wives, significant others, her grandson Atlas, grandson Sienna, and the 3 grandchildren that will be born this fall within 3 weeks of each other. I think you're going to like this one, and full disclosure, I had the pleasure of working with Jane for about 5 years, and I can vouch for so much of what she has to say. I think you're going to like this one. So we got backup, and so, like I said yesterday, you've already been introduced.
Okay.
Tell everybody how wonderful you are. And so now we're gonna get started.
Okay.
And Jane, thank you so much for being on Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And as I said in the introduction, I am so interested in schools having themes, making, being able to distinguish themselves from other folks, whether it's a charter, whether it's a magnet. But I just think it's going to be so important in the future. And that's why I was so happy to have you on, somebody who spent almost their entire career in magnet schools, to be able to talk about this and some of the issues with not only getting them started, but keeping them going. So in the introduction, we found out that you worked at two magnets, one for a brief period of time, and then at the Visual and Performing Arts magnet for quite a while.
Yes.
So I know it's a long time. I know it's a long time ago, Jane, but can you remember was that first magnet? Can you talk about the first magnet and then how you got to the Visual and Performing Arts?
The first one was Turner Elementary School, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if they're still I don't even know if they were technically a magnet school, but definitely a specialty school. Their emphasis was environmental sciences. So we had a center outside where they could grow things. They had animals, and it was very interesting. It was in the southeast part of Fresno, and like when they brought a cow from Fresno State one time, and kids who lived, in the valley and had no idea that milk came from cows. It was crazy, but that I mean, it was real. These kids had no idea. So it was a great opportunity for kids to access things that even though you might assume that they would know it living where we do, they just had it was a great opportunity for them to see that. I would say it was probably not as well articulated in terms of what was going on in the environmental center with the classroom. We had scheduled times that we would go and see, and we certainly would we would incorporate it into it, but it was not as extensive as Bullard Talent, I will say that. But it was, it was a good it was that was right at the beginning of specialty schools, kind of making their mark, and I think again, as you already alluded to, starting it's kind of the easy part, but then maintaining it and, it's I liken it's the same thing in ministries, youth directors, it's a very charismatic kind of a thing, and it's very contingent on the personnel, and so to have structures in place that allow transitions to be successful is really important, so, yeah.
Another thing that's interesting is the historical time period that this was happening,
Mhm.
because it was my understanding that in Fresno Unified, is what we're going to be talking about specifically, was very much like other urban districts around the country, is they were developing these theme schools, magnet schools, to
Mhm.
attract students to have parents choose to have their students go someplace versus having to do some sort of forced busing.
Right.
And so it was a reaction to that. So Turner Elementary with the environmental science, that was one of them. And you
Mhm.
were there for a couple of years, but then a couple of years later, you were at the Visual and Performing Arts Magnet. Now, were you recruited? Were you enticed? Were you just wanted to be a part of that? Tell us about that.
Well, in between Turner and Bullard Talent, I was at Daly School. It's actually Daly Heckman. It's the charter school now, and they had 2 campuses. The main campus was K4, and then the other campus was 5-6. So, in that instance, I was recruited for that too. I actually funny story, was in bed because I stayed in bed for my first pregnancy, was my son Robert, and the principal came and interviewed me in my bed. But that school, in the process of being there, Clyde Ramsey, who was the original director of Roosevelt School of the Arts, was needed some more administrative experience to go to do a principalship at a traditional school, not as a director of a school within a school, which Roosevelt School of the Arts is. So I was working with her. She moved on to Bullard Talent and recruited me to work there. So I followed her there. That's how I
And
ended
just
up there.
just to clarify for listeners, Roosevelt School of the Arts is a high school that is a school within a school that
Mhm.
has an arts emphasis. So
Visual
we got
performing
to
arts,
Buller
yes.
Talent, and I know it had been in existence for a few years before you got there. Could you talk a little bit about the history? I'm sure you know about the history of how it
Um,
got started.
Bullard Talent opened up in 1980, 1981, and again, I think it was a reaction to what was going on in the district, and, mastery learning was a really big thing at that point, and, there was so much emphasis on minutia. They would break everything down to the teeniest, tiniest possible skill and then assess the heck out of it. And then the record keeping for it was super laborious. You record things in like 3 different places. One I remember when we were doing that, and this is when I was at Turner, you had to have the information, like in your grade book, you had to have it on the scantrons, and then you had to have it on a chart on the wall. So if an administrator walked in, they could see exactly where you were. So it was very tedious and not particularly engaging. and absolutely not authentic. So I think people, they weren't happy with that. And Bullard Talent actually started out, it was primarily a gate school. In order to get in, there was an assessment process and it was three prong. You would just take a test. And for the most part, they were taking kids who already had mastered the kindergarten curriculum. So many of the kids, when I came in, I started in the middle school, and I would say at least half, if not two-thirds of the kids were actually old enough to be high school freshmen because they'd all done a year of kindergarten and then assessed to get in. And then they would also do an interview with them, and then they would do an observation with the child in a play group. It wasn't completely pure, but for the most part, these kids were super sharp kids, and also these were resource families. So many of the kids came with a lot of private lessons, dance, music. So, they were very resourced, and then I think I said it, yeah, when we were talking. If they weren't financially resourced, the parents were resourced in that they were in the know and that they wanted something more for their kids. So it was a very special group of parents. Also, so the parents really, it was driven by parents. They wanted something different for their kids. They wanted it centered around the arts. So the original staff had a lot of really highly trained arts people. Not all of them were, but everyone was interested in using the arts as a vehicle for, delivering curriculum. And the teachers would develop units that had arts applications, but were predicated on the academic standards. It was very organic. They had music specialists, theater specialists as well, but the classroom teachers in their own right, were either highly interested in it and self-taught or trained, in it. So it started out that way. And then also they monitored parent involvement. There was somebody who kept track of how many hours you donated, and if, you had to donate a certain amount of hours, which is something I think that we really need to go back to. This idea of just dropping your kids off at school and not having any buy-in, it doesn't really work. And then they also had grade requirements. If your grades were lower than a C, then you were asked to go elsewhere. So it was a very organic program. They also, again, had kids that were highly interested in the program. And I think probably a little less than 10 years in it. I think the Office of Civil Rights got involved in it and found that there was not equal access. So they went to lottery in the late 80s. I got there in 93. I think late 80s, early 90s, they went to a lottery system. And I think that there was a little bit of a kind of dip in things at that point because you have kids that, were coming with a lot of training and then kids with nothing. And I think there was some animosity. The founding folks were not necessarily happy with the advent of the lottery system.
So let's clarify a couple things. Number one, it's a K-8 school.
Yes.
And so when you say you were working in the middle school, you were working with grades 6 through 8, although the campus was one campus. So all the
Yeah.
students so all the students were there. The other thing I wanted to clarify is that you said that there was a performance aspect that they were observed, but it was just how they got along in groups. It wasn't like we're auditioning for this school, or am I
No,
wrong?
no, they did not audition to come to the school. I mean, I'm sure, and I don't know this for a fact, I'm sure they asked, do they take dance lessons? What 5-year-old knows what they wanna be when they grow up, besides, My Little Pony's master or something, but, I think they were looking for kids that would benefit, or who would take advantage of the arts.
And so then, as you described, after the Office of Civil Rights got involved, then it was a pure lottery
Mhm.
system.
Well,
And
I don't know that it was pure, because I don't know that it was completely pure, but basically what would happen is if a child left, they would attempt to replace, they would have this list of kids that had either applied or expressed interest, whatever, and they would try to replace with, gender. And so, like, if a 3rd grade girl left, they would try to replace with a 3rd grade girl. But that kinda went by the wayside, and it went to strictly when people apply with, and this is, I think, more so once we got further into the lottery system, it's just as your number came up, then the next child in would come.
my recollection of the lottery system was that, as you said, parents would just be interested in their kids being at the school. They would
Mhm.
sign up. If they didn't make it, then they were on a waiting list. And when I was there for the 5 years with you, the waiting list was nearly as long as the number of kids who were in school. I mean, people were very interested in getting their
Yes.
kids into the school.
Well, and I will say over the years, the reasons for being interested in school are not necessarily for the visual performing arts. And I think as the years have gone by, there has been a larger and larger number of people that are interested in the school, not for the visual and performing arts, which has diluted what we can accomplish. And I think as we moved away from teachers that were highly interested, highly trained in the visual and performing arts, we had to, and who could articulate that without a lot of instruction. We had to be more precise and definitive as to what the expectations were for the teachers and for the students. And I would say that in the same way that we have students that come to Bullard Talent for not necessarily the visual performing arts, we have teachers as well. You know, for the most part, we have a stable clientele. You know, I know when I was in not a magnet school, and it wasn't
Mm.
personal, obviously, but many of the schools, have revolving doors of transiency, and that's really hard, on teachers and students. So teachers like that, the way Bullard Talent is structured currently, we have specialists that deliver theater, art, movement, and music classes, and then the teachers are also expected to contribute to that as well. And then ideally, going along the origins of the school, there would be an integration between the specialists and the classroom teachers. Again, that's something that is diluted as you add people that are not necessarily interested in the program. We have had a lot of teachers that have been assigned there because they were displaced from whatever school that they were at, and they were overage teachers. And not that there's anything wrong with overage teachers, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know that you're interested in being there. So if they're not interested in it, being expected to develop a performance, our first through fifth grade teachers are expected annually to create a performance. And that can be very daunting. Yeah, there's lots of resources to assist you, but it's very daunting to do that if it's not your jam. So, that has been something that makes it difficult.
Brought up already a couple things that make maintaining the theme of the school, the emphasis of the school tough. One you mentioned was the teachers, and I think we need to, respect the contract and at the same time realize that there's a unique program going on. I would say, a lot of schools, a lot of programs will say, "Oh, we're the shining star of the district." But Bullard Talent is. There is not a school like that it actually, does the things that it does. And so I think that's an issue that it never really got settled in that there needs to be some sort of dispensation for the school as you are going through the contract, honoring the contract, but you've got, as what I say, Bullard Talent was a shining example of the arts. There are other programs within the district that also are doing a good job. I mean, we've got high school in West Fresno that shows up on the top, 100 high schools in the country every year. It's a school within a school, but that program needs to be protected because of its uniqueness and how well it does. So
Well, if we're going to move towards thematic, specialty magnet, whatever you want to call them, schools, I think the whole union thing has to be looked at. So, for example, I think this applies to all schools, but I can only speak to my experience. At Bullard Talent, we do 80 extra events a year. Okay, well, 80 extra events means that there's chair setup, that there's a huge amount of facilities used. And then add to it also that prior to COVID, we had an extended day program that maxed out at 100 students. With the advent of everybody's going to get, extended day care, we do 300 kids now, which means that one little portable isn't going to fly. So we don't have a theater. We have a multi-purpose room that we have to share with extended day, with the traditional uses of it, lunch, assemblies, and then rehearsals, all of those things. And in the midst of all of that, we don't get any extra custodial. So our janitors are running ragged. They are running ragged to keep up with the demands. And we have been very fortunate to have, really hardworking guys, that and gals. We had some really great gals too, that they cannot keep up with it. And we've gone round and round with the union and there's a formula for the square footage of the school and the fact that we do 80 extra events a year. That means absolutely nothing. There are just many things where the school needs agency, and I'm gonna just go out on a limb here because this is something for me that is phenomenally frustrating, is we have very limited funding that's provided by the district. And when the school started, the 150 they got $150,000, that paid for the specialists, that paid for the materials to manage the program. Well, that doesn't pay for, anything now. And yet we're required to do things that other middle schools do because that's what other middle schools do. And, my biggest complaint, I'll just be honest, is sports. And I want to be very clear when I talk about sports. I have 6 sons. I have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on sports. I am not anti-sports. But when you have a limited amount of resources and more importantly, we have a limited number of students. Our middle school has about 300 students. And when the students are presented with all these incredible visual performing arts opportunities and then sports as well, they want to do both. And, for years it's been argued, well, why can't they do both? When would you ever ask a sports team? When would a coach ever agree to let somebody miss 2 days a week of practice? It never, ever would that be acceptable. But when you have children who participate in sports, are elite groups, and it's up to the director to whether or not a child can participate or not, they have to let them go 2 days a week. We should be able to say, if sports is what you want, you should go to another school. To me, the number one problem with maintaining specialty magnet, thematic, whatever you want to call them, schools, is that they have to have agency. And if thematic schools is a thing of the future, then we need to look at it rather than say every school has to offer certain. I mean, there are certain things. Everybody has to provide, the standard curriculum, but how you do that doesn't have to be the same.
Yeah.
That can
Again,
be different.
to clarify something that you just said, you're not talking about when you're talking about missing rehearsals, you're talking about the elite groups, the groups that you have to audition to be in, which there is it's very competitive at Buller Talent to get into these groups. You have groups, you have to get into dance groups. I mean, you probably have kids that have been through the entire dance program, which is provided for at Buller Talent. And so it's,
And I want to
yeah,
interject one thing here too, because this is something I feel strongly about. I taught at the tail end of the pre-lottery days, and the bulk of my time at Bullard Talent has been lottery. And I am very much in favor of lottery K-5. I don't think in fact, every child in the district at every school should be getting what we offer, K-5. Every single child should. But by 5th grade, students know whether they like this or not. And kids who in the 5th grade say, I don't want to be in choir, I don't want to be in band, I don't want to be in art, I don't want to be in dance. We should help them find other accommodations for middle school. I think that everyone should have to reapply for the middle school. And I'm not talking about an audition. I'm talking about, okay, Susie, you've been at Bullard Talent since kindergarten. What group do you see yourself shooting for? What about the arts is interesting to you? And if the answer is nothing, they shouldn't be there. And we
you,
should be able, and that's another agency piece. We should not have to have students be in a place that they don't want to be. And I think some people just don't like to perform. Some people don't like anything about it. By the time they're in 5th grade, they know what they like and what they don't like. And many of our students are there because the parents think it's a safe place. The homeschool's not a safe place, or it's perceived as such. And that is not a reason to be at the school, and it dilutes the program. So
So let's let
there many aspects of agency that these schools need to have.
so let me go back to the second point. So you had talked about teachers, and we talked about teachers and the school needs agency and how they select teachers for this extra hard work. I mean, I talked to two teachers the other day, and that's the first thing that they said. It's hard work, but it's worth it. It's
Okay,
different.
and I want to qualify that too.
Okay.
Teachers at Bullard Talent, and this is probably going to offend some teachers. They're not working harder than other teachers. It is different. So to do what we do at Bullard Talent, one thing that makes it incredibly easier is that we don't have the transiency. We have a
What
very it's different. And I want to be very clear about it. There's some things that teachers at Bullard Talent get that teachers at other schools don't get. So it's just different.
it's
And I think
yeah.
teaching in general is hard work. And I will go one step further at the risk of offending again using religious metaphors, but it is missionary work. It is absolutely missionary work. And you're not going to get rich doing it. I think there's an incredible amount of satisfaction. And I'm going to tie something back to that I started to say I didn't finish. I'm very pro the lottery because I would argue that the results that we get are no different than pre-lottery days. It's harder to get those results because the kids don't come with training, but at the end of the day, pre-lottery, these kids were already trained.
Yeah.
It's like when and this I'll probably make people mad when I say this too, but like at Manchester Gate when they have high test scores. Well, of course they do. They have admission requirements. You know, when now when we do things, it is a function of what we provided. And I find that way more satisfying than having a kid that was already trained deliver a stellar performance. Now, everyone may not feel that way. That is personally how I feel.
Okay.
And
I was with you, and I'm with you on that as well, because I've always worked at schools and I was a coach. I was a coach, and it was always much more enjoyment and fulfillment when you took somebody that was 5'4" and you taught them how to be a quarterback versus somebody who's been, so I get that. I'm with you on that 100%. And I want to go back to something that you talk about with regards, you talk about K5 and then maybe 6-8 that you come back again, because I think it should be clear for teachers, you're coming here, this is the deal. This is the deal. And again, the school needs to have some agency. And if this is not for you, no hard feelings. This is not for you, no hard feelings. Okay. And the same thing with the parents. This is what we're doing. Okay. And I think you nailed it with respect to why parents will choose Bullard Talent. In fact, it was my doctoral research. And it was so interesting, the findings, where one of the findings was that if you took a look at why the parents chose and signed up, they had to take action to get their kids in. The most affluent parents, they wanted their kids there because it was a K-8 school and they didn't have to expose their kids to the chaos of a middle school. They felt it was just more calm, just a more stable thing.
and I want to interrupt you just for a minute too. I do not understand why the K-8 model is not employed more because there are so many positives for it. And the bottom line is this: there should never be 1,300 13-year-olds in one place. That is just criminal. And
Okay.
at 2-year programs, the parents don't get involved, the kids don't get involved, and that's why when you walk onto a traditional middle school campus, they look like high schoolers because they're looking to what's next. At a K-8 school, when you're in the 8th grade and you're getting a little big for your britches, well, that kindergarten teacher who remembers when you urinated on the carpet and used to cry every day for your mom, that's very humbling.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just like, to me, I don't get it. That's like the
I,
best. It's absolutely.
I'm with you. I'm with you, Jane. So just to get back to the findings of the
Sorry.
research. Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. So, so again, the more affluent parents, they wanted the kids there because to avoid middle school, there weren't that many parents who were there for the arts because they had the resources to go out, get individual lessons, be in other groups, et cetera, et cetera. The lowest resource, the poorest, lowest socioeconomics, they were there They didn't know what the school was about, but they knew that it was safe and it was a good school. They couldn't articulate what a good school is, but that's why they chose it. It was the middle group who were there for the education and for the arts because they didn't have the resources to provide all of these things.
And the fact that
So,
the parents will secure that for their kids is a resource.
yes,
That is a
yes.
resource. Yeah.
So here's the other thing that's happening. So you've got you Buller Talent, they come in kindergarten, and then what is it? At the end of second grade, they have the opportunity to test out to go to a gate school.
Yes.
So what happens? You've got a school with agency that is taking people with criteria that Buller Talent, this magnet school doesn't, other than a lottery. And those kids are going to get selected. And who's going to fill their spots? Who's on the waiting list? Then
So
you
you've
get to,
got kids that are already behind, and trying to bring them up to speed. And yes, I know where you're going next with this.
yeah, and then the next we've got the the junior high.
Well, no,
We,
there's a much bigger problem besides
oh, go
junior
ahead,
high.
go ahead.
4th grade, we go from class size reduction to, full size. So, in the K-3, they're 24, 25. And this is not as profound as it's been in the past because, the latest union, agreement is we went from 32 being the max for the 5th grade class up through 5th grade, 5th, 6th grade. It's down to 28 now. But what would happen at our school in 4th grade, which was even worse than adding kids in 2nd grade, is adding what amounted to a full class of kids in the 4th grade. So kids who'd had no visual performing arts experiences are now dropped into the program. And, sometimes you get a kid that had private training, but more often than not, and a lot of times that what we'll get, if I think we have a disproportionate number of kids that have problems, whatever those problems may be, and they're hoping that Bullard Talent will solve those problems. And so you have this high concentration of kids that were not successful coming into the 4th grade all at once, and you're trying to acculturate them, you're trying to bring them up to speed, and that is incredibly difficult, and then just add to it that 4th grade academically is a very difficult year anyway. It's a huge transition from 3rd to 4th grade, the expectations, there's many things that make 4th grade a really hard year. So it's like a triple whammy, at our school because you've got all these kids. And even now with the reduction in the number of the max of number of kids in the intermediate grades, it's still a very significant number of children. And it's hard for everyone. It's hard for the kids. It's hard for the parents. It's hard for the teachers. It's really hard.
And so as you talk about all these issues, it's not that we don't want these kids.
Not
It's
at all.
about the integrity of the program. You've got a high quality program. How can we, as a district, as a site, whatever, come up with policies and procedures that continue to support and maintain this high quality program? Because if it's not, it's going to be gone. And usually these programs have a champion, somebody who's been there a while. And I'm going to tell you, Jane, I'm concerned because you've been that champion for 30 years. I
Well, I
remember,
want to say the guy that's taking my place, Robert Sanchez, is fantastic. And he's gonna knock it out of the park.
I'm
He's
sure he
he's
will.
he's gonna do really well, but it's an uphill battle, without a doubt.
It's not only an uphill battle, but you have to understand the geography of that hill. And that's one of the things that you knew. I remember I was telling the story the other day to a couple of teachers who we had worked with there together. And I remember when I was there, my first year there, the principal was it was also her first year there. And I remember being in a meeting with you and who was the director of, I don't know what her title was, the director of the arts.
Yeah.
And I think we were going through a budget. And she, in this very condescending voice, said, two more administrators we have to train. And absolutely, she was correct because the things that were happening were so different. And it was the difference that made the people want to come to the program and work hard for those 80 extra performances a year.
Well, there are so many assumptions about Bullard Talents, like, first of all, that every child that wants to be there, that they are handpicked, that they auditioned, that they're super talented. The first trip that we took to out of state, it wasn't the first trip that we took, but it was the first trip that it was the beginning of the way we travel currently. We operated under the motto, ordinary kids doing extraordinary things. We are not, and this is no slam to the children. We take just regular kids
Yes.
and we provide a lot of opportunity and we get results. But it is increasingly difficult when there are just so many roadblocks. My own personal feeling is, again, this idea of being a missionary. Every single person who works at that school, from the top, I don't like saying top to the bottom, but from site administration down to support staff, has to be passionate about what we do.
Yeah.
And if there's a breakdown anywhere, it doesn't work. And you can't half it. You either believe that it works or you don't. And, again, I don't mean to belabor the sports point, but and honestly, for me, in my groups, I didn't allow sports. And when I quit allowing kids to be in sports, the very first big musical I did at Bullard Talent was The Music Man. And I was working with, again, students who were really a year older. And it was just this incredible show because these kids had so much private training. They were so wise beyond their years. They just did a phenomenal job of it. And I'm proud of all the shows that we've done. So I don't want to make it sound like I was more proud of this one. But in the course of arranging for the documentation of the show in portraiture, a child missed the photo sessions. And they didn't, because they were in sports. They didn't yell at the coach. They yelled at me. When there's a championship game and a final rehearsal, I know our dance people often, if you're not there for the choreography, you're not in the number. Well, we had a little girl who was an incredible athlete and also an incredible dancer, but she missed so much that of the 8 dances that they presented at the end of the year, she was in one. They didn't yell at the coaches.
Yeah.
They yelled at the teacher, the dance teacher. I just feel like, if we take it out of the Bullard Talent thing, the way that you make decisions is you ask yourself the question. And there's all kinds of really great things going on. You can't do everything. There's X amount of time. And one of the things I find with our kids who do engage in our program, they want to do everything. They want to do everything. And if you offer them something more, they will do it. But there's only so many hours in the day. These are children. They can only do so much. And many of our programs are very demanding. You can't keep offering things. Here's an example, and it was an arts option. We had the last group that we added that I would say we can't add any more groups because we don't have the space, we don't have the staff, and the kids that are already in 15 groups want to be in it too. We added mariachi, which is a very popular group on our campus. We tried to add folklorico, which would be a natural thing to do with it. It was too much. It broke the bank. It
Yeah.
was too much. You can only do so much. And so when you add all these things in and people think, again, they think I'm anti-sports. They think I don't like this, I don't, or whatever. Again, just take it out of the visual performing arts area. If you're adding something and it doesn't improve the program, then don't do it.
Well, and
That's the measure. And if you are adding things that don't support the program, then you're diluting it. You're lessening it. And I feel like that is the problem, is that we feel like we have to do everything. It is not possible to do everything. And we have to accept that we're not good enough to do everything. We're not that good.
I think it gets back to what I said in the beginning is that you don't have to be everything if you've identified who you are. Because
But
once you've
you do, right? In the
well,
current
hang on,
system.
hang on. But once you've identified who you are, now you can say, this is why we don't do that. There's a reason why we don't do that. But if it's not known up front, and if there's not a place to do that within the district, within a private school, within sports leagues or whatever, these, all the recreational leagues, then it becomes a problem. But the reality is there is a place for that. But you have to decide. You have to decide if you're coming to school here, this is who we are. No hard feelings if you don't want to come. The listeners of this podcast will be familiar with the name Robert Pondisio. Robert Pondisio is a big advocate for classic education and, just really, knowledge-based, cultural literacy, etc. And he said they moved so his daughter could be in a better place for sports because that's what the school was and that's what they wanted to do. And I think that's going to be part of the issue because we need to let teachers know this is who we are. This is what we do. We have to let the parents know this is who we are. This is what we do. And by the way, these are all the things we don't do. But we can't do that. Like you can't just have agency because you have to have a system of these schools where they can get what they need. Because if you're the only choice of a great place that's safe, that's K-8, we're going to run into these problems every time.
Right, but I do think that it is absolutely a paradigm shift at the downtown level. I'll go to the back to the custodial thing. You know, we should be allocated more custodial services. And then maybe there's something else that we don't need, like to me. And again, I've only used the sports thing because it's heavy on my heart. But if we could have the money that is allocated for sports, and I know that there are different pots. I get like to me, what would make sense is this is how much money every school gets. That's where the equity is. Every school gets X amount of dollars. Now you use that money just to acquire the things that support your mission. That's equitable. It's not equitable that at Bullard Talent we're expected to do everything that everybody else does. And like for example, with sports, they don't pay for uniforms, they don't pay for travel costs, they don't pay for refs, don't pay for anything. The bulk of my time is spent raising money. And Randy Berger, Randy, one of my favorite things that he says is that when you're a director, 90% of what you're doing is production work. The directing which is the best part. That's the fun part. About 10% of what we do.
Well, here's the irony of the sports that got in your way. If I had a kid, let's say I've got a son or a daughter. That's how old I am.
Oh, wait, you do have a daughter.
I do have a daughter. Okay.
You do have a daughter.
And wanted to be in basketball. And I'd say, honey, let's go look at the basketball court. And they'd say, well, there's no gym. I'm playing on asphalt. You're right. So there,
But here's the trick, though. Here's the thing. I think people come to our school for sports because the reality is, and maybe this has changed since my kids were little, but when they were at Tenaya, for example, if you weren't in club ball, if you weren't a club soccer player or a club baseball player, you weren't going to get on those teams. You could play at Bullard Talent. We win in our league. We win in our league.
We have a different division. We are in the different division. That's absolutely right.
And so to me, that is totally disingenuous anyway.
That's what I'm telling you. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to say.
That is such a huge, I mean, people feel the sports people feel I shouldn't question it because I feel just as strongly that they do that sports should be offered. To me, Bullard Talent cannot go any further unless we stop offering sports.
And I'm going to go broader than that. And I'm going to agree with you. And they're not going to stop offering sports until there are options for parents that provide the safety, the good education, whatever that means, that it's a good school,
Right.
and that it's K-8. So there have to be other options besides, oh, I'm going to this because my kid he's not good enough to be in a travel team, but he's good enough to be in the lower level league on a school team. What I'm saying is it has to be a system of these schools.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, it's time to stop then.
Oh, you can die happy now, right?
I'm going to write that down. Okay. So I've asked you a lot of questions, Jane. Do you have any questions for me?
Okay. So we're going to generalize this question. So let's assume that we have a fully developed thematic magnet specialty school program. And there's all kinds of options. And you would assume that there would be teachers, specialists, and principal, the traditional support staff. What is one position that you think every school should also have that
In a
doesn't
j
currently exist? To
Oh,
make
man.
to make these schools, I'll give you a hint. You did that for us when you were at Bullard Talent.
Tell me what you're thinking, and then I can give you my analysis of your answer.
Okay. We always joked and said, "You look good in a suit." No, I think every single school needs somebody who is their job is to do the PR for the school. Because I know myself, I know what needs to be done. I say this like I'm still working, I'm not.
Yeah.
I knew what needed to be done. I knew what needed to be done. There were not enough hours in the day for me to hustle. And I think part of the problem with thematic schools is that there's not enough hustling being done. And when you were, I mean, remember you got the first keyboard lab. You got it done because, and I'm not saying that you weren't doing anything, but you were not tied to a classroom. You were not tied to a group. So you could go and be the suit. You could go and be the face. You could go and represent us. So I think for these schools to be successful, they need a suit. They need somebody whose job is to promote the school so that that mission is very clear. So if all of these schools become, the winning team and the whole bandwagon thing where people want to go with a winning team, they want to jump on that bandwagon. We need somebody to do that authentically.
Authentically, and I did that, and I was able to do that, and I was able to do that,
You were good at it. You were very, very good at it.
well, because I believed in it so much. I mean, my daughter came we tried a couple years to get in the lottery, and she got in 4th grade, and she was I don't usually use this kind of language, but she was quiet. In fact, my dad would say she wouldn't say shit if she had a mouthful. That's how quiet she was.
Remember that? She was very
She
quiet.
was so she came in 4th grade. In a month and a half, there was a talent show that was for the entire community, and she was up there performing. And
But
I'm
Clark,
getting emotional talking about it
well,
because
let me interject something here too, because
okay,
this speaks to another really important thing. Obviously, we have students that are underprivileged on a variety of levels. And we spend a lot of time on those kids. But Celeste is a really good example. The kid, she comes from a good family. Her parents are a resource. Her parents are advocating for her. But here's a child who's very shy. And I have an example of a student. In fact, he's going to college next year. And one of his questions for his college app was to write about a teacher who had made an impact on him. And he wrote about me. This child was super bright, fantastic family. He came to me in the 6th grade. He was so emotionally constipated. He could not step out. If he couldn't be perfect, he couldn't do it. And from the outside looking in, this child looked defiant. And he was like the furthest one could get. He was absolutely, totally, and completely compliant, but he could not step out of his space
yeah.
enough. He is going to be successful no matter what he does. Whether he gets a lead in the show or not is irrelevant. But when I was able to have the opportunity to work, and again, this is a resource kid. This is not a poor kid. This is not a disadvantaged kid. This is a kid who's got it all already. He's going to be just fine. But to be able to help him through that emotional constipation, to step out of the perfectionism that was crippling, that shut him down to where he couldn't do anything. These programs allow, and it's not just, Bullard Talent. When you have kids that are doing something that they like, that they're engaged in, and it matters to them, then you can take them on, regardless of whether they're disadvantaged or advantaged. And to me, Celeste was like that. It's not just about that. We affected kids from all walks of life. There was another kid I remember who just dad was a doctor, and he the kid came across super arrogant, whatever. And we didn't take him in groups when he was younger. And in the 8th grade, it was like we totally turned this kid around. totally turned this kid around. And it's like, to me, those are the satisfying things. And it's, I can tell you the same thing about a child that's, that struggled and struggled. And doing the middle school play was always my favorite thing, to have, the kindergarten teacher say, "Oh my God, that's the kid who cried every day for 95 days, and they're up there doing this." There were so many success stories. And I think one of the things is that it's so critical to have leadership that absolutely believes that whatever your program is, in the case of Bullard Talent, the visual performing arts, that it is life changing, and that does not mean you need to be a performer. A patron is just fine. You have to believe with your heart that whatever your specialty is, that it is going to open doors and change this person for good. And if you don't have that at the top, and that coloring everything that happens at this school, you're not going to succeed.
Amen. Amen. Jane, it has been wonderful having an opportunity to talk to you and to see you, even though it's virtually.
I know.
And I hope we'll be able to talk again soon.
All righty. Well, thank you for having me. And I agree with you. Bullard Talent is a very special place. And my hope is that it continues.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused Adaptable Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.